Hey guys, I wanted to talk about trailer maintenance for hot shots. I'm not going to get into the semis, that's a little bit of a different world. But I want to get into some of the stuff that I'm seeing on Facebook and some of the ways that hopefully you can help avoid some breakdowns. So when you get into this business, one of the things you have to understand is these gooseneck trailers and such that we have, they're generally built pretty darn well. There are some that aren't built as well, but you know, they're good trailers, but they really weren't designed to be running 100,000 miles a year. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is when something breaks, it usually breaks in a really bad spot. Most of these trailers, you know, they're farm trailers. They're things that have been moving, you know, not too far. So you break down, it's not the end of the world. You drive home, you get your parts, you do it. But when we break down, you know, we might be based out of Illinois and we're out in North Dakota or something along those lines. So you want to eliminate breakdowns as much as possible. You want to be safe, you want to be secure, and when things do happen, you want to be familiar with your trailer so you know how to fix them. Okay, so I just kind of want to go over some of the things. These are my opinions. For you guys who don't know me at all, my background is mechanics. I'm ASC Master Certified Automotive. I got, you know, half the diesel stuff. I've been, you know, master techs at shops. I did that for about 25 years. You know, I've got a lot of time on my belt. I'm not saying the best guy out there, but I've seen a lot, and I'm pretty decent and I have a good understanding. So lost my camera connection there, it looks like. But anyway, so these trailers are pretty simple. You've got yourself a frame, okay? You've got some suspension attached to that frame. Attached to the suspension is your axles. At the end of the axles, you have brake assemblies and hub assemblies. You got some wheels and tires held on by lug nuts and bolts. You have your gooseneck coupling or fifth wheel, or, well, we'll just leave it, you know, gooseneck and fifth wheel. And of course you have your electrical running throughout the trailer. One of the things that I see on Facebook a lot are guys breaking springs, hangers and things like that coming off and whatnot. My opinion is when you first get your trailer, even if it's a brand new trailer, but especially if it's a used trailer, you should take the time and disassemble the suspension. Why? Well, when you, let's say it's leaf spring suspension, when you unbolt it, you know, there's only two bolts, you know, holding those leaves on, one in the front, one in the back, and of course you have your U-bolts underneath. But even if you just, you know, pull the two bolts front and back, leave your U-bolts alone, it lets you inspect those bolts that they pivot on. And if they are getting worn, get yourself some new bolts, put in some new bolts. If the bushing inside the spring has worn through and you're wearing into the spring, get yourself some new springs. Okay, especially on the lighter trailers, a set of springs isn't that much money. I mean, you can get springs for 35 and 50, and you know, maybe it's $100 or whatever, and you have to replace 4 of them. Okay, that's $400 for springs, but now they're brand new, and you get some fresh bolts, and you can lubricate those bolts and go from there. Springs have a life cycle. You can only bounce them up, flex them so many times before they snap and crack. If you are running especially a non-CDL trailer that's lighter weight, my opinion only, at minimum once a year, assuming you're doing 100,000 miles or so, just replace the springs. Okay, they're small, and when a crack starts, there's not a lot of other material there to, you know, keep it from falling apart. Doesn't give you a lot of time to check that crack. So just for your own peace of mind, and for as cheap as it is and as quick as you can change them, really, unbolt those things, throw some fresh springs in there. Okay. You should be doing, you know, obviously inspections on these things. Do a good monthly inspection, whatever. Definitely get in there and look at your springs, check them for cracks. Okay, on your heavier trailers, check them for cracks. Check them on the sides, check them, you know, on the tops. Look for little rusty spots that there shouldn't be rusty spots on, rusty lines. That means it's cracked. Get yourself a new spring. Hub assemblies. pretty much all your 10, 12, 15,000 pound axles are going to be an oil bath. There's a lot of people out there that don't like oil bath because they leak, they do this, they do that. If your oil bath hubs are leaking, you probably have another issue. Like your wheel bearings might be loose or something along those lines. One of the other things that happens is, okay, I just replaced my axle seals and 2 weeks later and I'm getting leaks. Okay, what actually happens on those is it's not actually the lip of the seal that's leaking, it's going around the back of the oil seal and it's leaking. Two things. Number one, when you go to put your seal in, just take a little bit of silicone, black RTV or whatever, put that around the outside of the seal, okay, or in the inside of the hub, you know, however you want to do it, or the, you know, the brake assembly, hub assembly, and you know, that'll keep it from leaking around the outside, okay? Second, when you fill your hub oil up, you have those clear hubcaps and you pull out that, you know, center plug, you don't fill it up until it starts coming out the plug, okay? There's a line that goes around there. It's a circle on the outside of it. That's as high as you fill it up. That line's just over where the bearings are going to be, okay? That way your seal is not actually submerged in oil. Oil bath hubs, I mean, you can go 100,000 miles, you know, no problem. Change your oil, you know, and go another 100,000 miles. Obviously inspect your bearings, but, you know, go from there. If you say, no, Ron, I like grease tubs. Okay, on your lighter weight trailers and things like that, that's fine. And some people say, you know, I use them on my 12,000 pound axles. I don't have any problems. Okay, my recommendation would be this. Use a moly impregnated silicone grease, okay? Learn how to properly pack bearings. There are YouTube videos on that. Pack your bearings nice and full, grease those suckers up, okay? Now, how do you maintain grease, okay? How do you maintain those greased bearings, you know? Well, I've got this little grease fitting on the front and I can hook up my grease gun and I can pump fresh grease in there. It's awesome. Please don't do that, okay? If I'm shoving grease into this end, it can only come out the other end. You know, that grease doesn't evaporate, it's got to go somewhere. The only place for it to go is past the grease seal out the back and into your brakes. So what you do when you are pumping in all that fresh grease to take care of your bearings is you are now lubricating your brakes, which means you have no brakes, okay? So please, if you are going to do you know, grease instead of oil bath, just learn how to pack the bearings, put it together, set your preload, you know, whatever it is for your recommend, you know, your manufacturer, and just leave it. Okay, now I would recommend jacking that thing up and checking it, you know, once a month for a while until you know, make sure everything's good. And then if you're just greasing your bearings, me personally, I would pull it apart, you know, every 3 months and take a look at your bearings, take a look at the grease, things like that. If everything looks good, wipe off the old grease, put some new grease on there. If it doesn't look good, well, you're gonna have to change your bearings, and you now have the lifespan of your bearing. Your wheel bearings might last you 6 months of heavy, you know, running. They might last you 2 years. You know, I don't know. It depends on how much weight you carry and other conditions. But especially if you're running grease, you're gonna have to do more maintenance than you will if you're running oil bath. Okay, that's just is the way it is. On your brake assemblies, a lot of people just running standard electric brakes. Nothing wrong with standard electric brakes. They can be very powerful. You do have to sometimes get in there and make adjustments or whatever. Just make sure you're checking them often enough that you're not losing, that they're not just completely grinding into the face of the brake drum in there. Once that sucker gets, you know, really ground in, the shoe that's actually causing the drag, it'll eat itself away through, and you'll start digging into your coils. Okay, once you get your coils, now you have no brakes because you're creating opens and shorts and all sorts of bad things that go along in there. Those assemblies, you can use brand name Dexter. I usually use aftermarket because I found they a lot of times work better than the actual Dexter products. It's rather frustrating. You pay good money for Dexter products and then they don't work as well as the aftermarket stuff. So we've covered springs, you know, we've covered a little bit of suspension, we've covered a little bit on those electric brakes. For electric brakes, it is absolutely imperative that all your electrical connections are clean and tight, and you know, you have just a good connection, because if you don't, you have no brakes. Do not ever use those Scotch lock things where you just put the 2 wires in and clamp this sucker down and now I've got a connection. They're not weatherproof. You're cutting the wires. Yeah, they make a connection, but that connection is going to corrode, and very quickly you won't have any brakes. You can use heat shrink sealed butt terminals where you get in there and you crimp the wires together and then, you know, heat shrink it down. That works well. Something else that actually works surprisingly well, believe it or not, go to the electrical section in your hardware store and get the weatherproof, if you will, wire nuts. Okay, they're usually blue with a little orange gasket on there, and they're already filled with dielectric grease. Okay, get the larger ones, not the smaller ones. You take those, you wire nut the thing together, and it's sealed. And it might sound hillbilly-ish or whatever, but I have, in years and years and years of using those things, I have yet to pull one apart and find corroded wires. The dielectric grease and the weather shielding and everything in there just holds it all in. It's a good, very secure connection, and it just works. You can disagree with me on that one, fine. Use heat shrink butt connectors. That's perfectly fine too. You know, that's technically probably the right way to do it. If you are using hydraulic brakes, electric over hydraulic, I don't know why it is, but I have found that if I routinely meaning every 3 months or so, if I bleed the brakes out a little bit, and it should not be like this, there should be no air in the system, but if I bleed the brakes out, push some fresh fluid, the brakes seem to work better, notably better, and that's why I'm mentioning it. Same thing with the you know, electric over hydraulic brakes. You still have to make sure your electrical connections are good, make sure your battery is strong and being powered, that runs that pump. You know, make sure all that stuff is in good shape. So you're done with that work, you're going to go put the wheels back on this thing. Okay, when you put wheels on a trailer, you want to tighten them down properly. Okay? That means tightening them down with a torque wrench. All right, how I generally put the wheels in, I put the wheel on there, you start running your lug nuts up a little bit, and then I tighten them up maybe about 1/3 of the way. You know, I have to tighten mine up to, I want to say like a 220 foot-pounds or something on my trailer. I forget what it is, I'll have to look it up. Okay, I don't start with lug nut number 1 straight to 220. I'll get in there and I'll take them to about 50 in a nice star pattern, and then I'll hit them again probably about 150, and then I go back around and take them down to their full 220. Why do I do that? Well, number 1, I want to make sure that wheel's on there nice and even and clamped on there. Okay, but number 2, why am I torquing it to the actual specification? Well, when you tighten down that lug, okay, well, the lug nut, the lug actually stretches a little bit. The steel is elastic, and that's what actually holds the wheel on. Okay, if you don't tighten it enough, obviously you don't have enough clamping force. It can, you know, wiggle, get loose, then the nuts fall off and your wheels fall off and you have a bad day. Okay, well, you definitely don't want to not tighten it enough, so I'm gonna really tighten that sucker down. All right, so you over tighten them. Okay, well, now you've taken that lug and you've overstretched it, and now it can't pull back anymore. Okay, and when you overstretch it, the lug nut will actually come loose, or you can break the lugs on these things and they'll snap. Okay, so you see these pictures of guys on Facebook, I don't know what happened, I tightened them all down and all the lug nuts broke. Well, that's because they pulled out their 1/2-inch impact, they went and they cranked those, you know, it wasn't one ooga dugga, it was about 14 ooga duggas, and they tightened the fuck out of those things, and eventually they all snapped. Or they didn't tighten them properly, they just, you know, wrenched down on it, you know, they didn't use a torque wrench, and it should have been 50 foot-pounds tighter, and the lug nuts came loose and pounded them all off there. Okay, wheels don't just fall off, they really don't, unless you're driving a Dodge and the lug nuts break, or the lugs break because they had a recall on those things. Okay, I'll give you that one. But wheels don't fall off, they just don't. Okay, not really. Now, that being said, you've put your wheels on, you put your lug nuts on, you've torqued them properly. I like taking a little bit of torque check. Let me see if I have any, you know, yeah, here we go. I actually have some of this stuff here, cross check, and you just open this up and you just put a little line on the lug nut and the lug, and it puts a nice little orange line on there. It stays. So when I'm doing my pre-trips, all I have to do is walk around. I don't have to check the tightness of the lugs. I can just visually, boom, those are all, they haven't moved. Well, if they haven't moved, that means they're still good, okay? So, you know, that's about it as far as that go. Lights, wiring. You have to make sure your lights work, okay? All the lights. If you have a light on your trailer, it has to work. You know, at the very least, you need your minimum required by DOT, but you know, all the lights have to work. Well, how do I make sure my lights work? Well, number one, pretty much we're using all LED lights nowadays, okay? LEDs, they don't fail all that often. Get yourself some quality LEDs, they don't fail. Carry some spares with you. If you're using rounds, carry rounds. If you're carrying ovals, you know, carry ovals. Carry your marker lights, things like that. Carry a little bit of wire with you, some spool of wire. Carry wire strippers, wire crimpers, connectors. You know, carry, you know, some electrical tape, some zip ties, things like that to make some simple wiring repairs, okay? How do you make sure your lights aren't going to have problems? Well, if you just bought a brand new trailer and you look underneath there and you see a bunch of those, again, those Scotch locks, you have to rewire your trailer. Go through and put on sealed connections, however you want to do it. You can use the wire nuts if you want. They work, they just do. Or you can use heat shrink, you know, butt connectors, or you know, you can solder and cover those in heat shrink, but I would just use the butt connectors personally. Go through and seal everything up, okay? Wires generally don't fail by themselves. It's the connections that fail. The connections fail because either A, they get loose and they come apart, or B, usually moisture and crud and stuff gets in there and it causes corrosion and they fall apart that way, all right? So if you can seal everything up, that's a great way of making sure you're not going to have problems. Inside of your junction box where the pigtail from the trailer to the truck comes in, make sure that's coated with a little bit of light grease or something, because that will get, you know, that's always exposed. Make sure you have that coated in just a little bit of light grease or something, just to keep the moisture and stuff off of it. That helps. Your pigtail 7 wire. Make sure you're greasing that connection. That's not a sealed connection. Make sure you're putting some dielectric grease or something on there and running that up into your truck. And then, you know, if you're never taking your trailer off, you know, once a month or so, put some fresh grease on there and go, because that will corrode, especially your positive terminal going to your battery charger and things like that. On your trailer, you're going to get corrosion there. So getting that nice and tight and lubricated up will actually save you a lot of problems. So there's other things I'm going to get into as we move on. I'm going to get into some wiring, how to wire in lights on your trailer, automatically come on when you put your truck in reverse, and in addition you can put a switch. I'm going to try to show you guys some stuff, but that's probably going to be when it's warmer out. If you guys have questions about maintenance, you know, I'm just kind of talking here, but I want to try to give some good ideas. Please put some comments in the section, and I will go into as much detail as I can, maybe even show a few things just to help everybody keep rolling the best they can. So as always, guys, be safe. I'm gonna go get something to drink. Thanks, guys.